Hello, everyone. Can you hear me first? Okay, great. My name is Dr. Jones. I'm with the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. Welcome to everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us in this wonderful, valuable, informative session. Dr. Stacy Townsley will be our presenter today on credit for prior approval. Please make sure you know I have put the link for where you will find the PowerPoints, the transcripts, and links to other sessions in the chat, but I'll put it in there again. And as people come on, I'm admitting people as they come on. We will do questions after the presentation. When the presentation is over, put your question, or you can be putting your questions in the chat at any time. But when the presentation is over, I'll be reading some of the questions. And remember, the questions, it will be in a transcript, so you'll be able to get it from the link that I give you. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please put that in the chat, and we'll make sure someone works with you on that. All right. I think everyone's mic has been muted. Please mute your cameras. I think that's being taken care of also. Again, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Townsley now. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Jones. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to start us off by opening up a poll, and you should be able to see it on the screen and submit your response. I'd like to get a sense from folks, how familiar are you with credit for prior learning, which is the topic of today's session. All right, well, out of 23 responses, hold on, see a few more being submitted. You should be able to see the responses there. I think the majority of you are at least somewhat familiar, and about a third of you are not at all familiar. So this is the session for you. So what I'm going to do then is share my presentation and we'll get going. So again, thank you for joining us today. My name is Stacy Townsley. I serve as the Commission for Higher Education's first Associate Commissioner for Adult Strategy. It's a real area of an intentionality for the Commission. I was hired about 3 months ago into this new role, most recently having come from Ivy Tech. And I've been in higher ed for nearly 20 years, working much of the time directly with adult learners. And I'm delighted to be joining you today for this presentation on credit for prior learning. And so just to give you a sense of what we're going to cover today, really, looking at the why, adult educational attainment here in Indiana, the what, we're looking at credit for prior learning, the so what, some of the challenges and opportunities for stakeholders, regardless of whether or not you're directly at a post-secondary institution. And then the now what, some of the strategy and next steps we're taking as a commission, and then thinking about, how you might get involved or how you might bring this information back to your organization. And so we'll first start off with the why. As Commissioner Lowry highlighted in his keynote session this morning, one of the major challenges facing our state is the fact that our adult attainment rate is rather low. We're 39th overall in the country as we look to some post-secondary education, post-high school. Here in Indiana, we have, depending on how you slice it, approximately 2 million adults without a credential. Nearly 40% of those have some college, but no degree or credential. And so the question becomes, how then might we help as Hoosier adults further their education or training, not only to achieve this, the goal of attaining a credential, but also, the implied value of furthering social and economic mobility. So as we dig into this, first I'll start off by saying, when we talk about adult learners, really the definition of adult learner is stretchy. It can mean a lot of things depending on, the individual, but for purposes of today's session and for much of what's coming out of the commission, we use the age group of 25 and older as a threshold. And really this is to support alignment and comparison with other national data sets and other things that we use as we think about adult learner research, and that includes the census. And as suggested by Lee Ruthven's presentation on adult learner data earlier today, the adult learner population has some unique characteristics and needs. And so this slide depicts the learner journey and highlights some of the common barriers and potential supports that could be provided for those adult learners. And we think about this too. In general, for this graphic, it presents the learner journey all the way from that initial interest, the recruitment phase, into that admissions enrollment, into an orientation, and throughout their career at an institution, completing a credential, be a certificate or an associate degree or a four-year degree, and then that transition into continuing their education or directly into the next step in their career or other opportunities. And I'll make a note here that, of course, we know this is not linear, it's cyclical. Of course, adult learners, as other students, tend to perhaps stop out, as we call it, or take a break for a number of reasons. But the problem is when they stop out for a much longer period of time, it becomes that much more difficult to then step back into this process. And as many of you know, working with adults, it can be a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to support our adults. So again, thinking about some of those barriers, these aren't listed in any particular order, but I wanted to put them on this slide. Think about, we heard earlier today about the value of education and the wording and the assumptions that are prevalent around the cost. Is it affordable? And sometimes it isn't, right? And so we think about that could be a potential barrier. The lack of that strong campus connection, the lack of key information. We think about advising or even that initial admissions step of the way or along their journey. How are they getting access to the information? Some other potential barriers here include unpredictable scheduling, the course modality, the course difficulty, and then, of course, as we think about the responsibilities of many adults, the focus on the health and family emergency, the change in jobs, the living expenses, et cetera. These are they probably don't come as a surprise. We think about the potential supports and some of the underlying principles there, and it's all about barrier removal. And listed here in alpha order, we'll go through those, but highlighted is that credit for prior learning. What is it that we're doing to honor the work and life experiences of adults as they're coming to us? How can that be incorporated into their experience? And so that leads us into really focusing in on, what is credit for prior learning? Many of you expressed in the poll that you had some familiarity with it. In a nutshell, credit for prior learning, or CPL, allows institutions to capture and award college credit for student experience and apply that credit to their degree or credential program. It is essentially that way that we can honor the work and life experiences of adult learners and help them complete a credential. I also want to note here that credit for prior learning, CPL, is often referred to or has been referred to as prior learning assessment, or PLA. And PLA is technically a subset of the broader umbrella of CPL. But it is interchangeable. The term CPL is now more readily used by national organizations, such as the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, CALE, and others. A couple of definitions for CPL are shared here on the slide. Again, they're very general, but it is that broader understanding of the types of experiences that adult learners can bring to us as institutions, and how do we view and value that education or training. On the bottom, the Commission has a state financial aid policy that defines CPL or PLA, refers to an evaluation through which an eligible institution grants college credit for knowledge or skills learned outside the eligible institution without requiring that a student enroll in a course or pay the equivalent of full tuition fees. So this slide really just shows you some of the common methods that are referenced as we think about credit for prior learning. Of course, these aren't all of them, but they can be grouped into exams, for example. The standardized exams include the College Board's CLEP exams, the Dante's DSST exams, the UXL. Institutions can also award credit based on comprehensive exams developed by campus faculty. These are referred to as challenge or departmental exams. Another bucket here is portfolio or other individualized assessments. Again, here the faculty are the ones who are evaluating and awarding the credit as appropriate based on that student's portfolio or demonstration of their learning. Again, from a variety of experiences and non-credit activities. And then another bucket that encapsulates many of these boxes on the screen is that evaluation of non-college, non-credit programs, including industry certifications, licenses, apprenticeship programs, employer or military training. Institutions can award credit for these as they are aligned with the learning objectives for a credential program, and they could be based on the institution's own evaluation or recommendations provided by national organizations such as the American Council on Education, otherwise known as ACE, or the National College Credit Recommendation Service. Those are two very common and prevalent national organizations. Listed here on the slide is another bucket of other. Really, these refer to things like the types of high school exams, for example, advanced placement and international baccalaureate, that an individual might earn at an earlier stage in their educational career. They are sometimes included in this broader definition of credit for prior learning, but they typically aren't available to most returning adult learners. But it is part of that bigger bucket. It's certainly if they have access to that credit and they bring it to an institution, it would likely be recognized, but frequently it's not part of the adult learner portfolio. So I wanted to share with you, and again, as Dr. Jones highlighted, this presentation is on our website and the links are there, but some of the current state legislation and policies we have supporting the use of credit for prior learning. One of those was just last year passed Indiana House Bill 1549, and this is referencing the idea of a clearinghouse, this consolidated inventory at educational institutions, public institutions in Indiana. It references the need for credit for prior learning data collection. And the Commission has then taken that and at least created the first iteration of a clearinghouse on our Transfer In website. And I have that at the end of this slide as a resource. Really, it's just a consolidation of all of the websites and links for the various institutions, but there's room for growth there. Another piece of legislation is this Indiana Code 2142722. It's for credit for military service courses. And again, it's really just requiring that each of our public institutions adopt a policy to award credit to students with military training, basically in accordance with ACE, as well as that state educational institutions' role, scope, and mission. So those are two key pieces of legislation that support the use of the credit for prior learning. Another piece of that is, I made reference to this a little bit earlier, the Commission has a financial aid policy that allows for students to use state financial aid to cover fees for CPL/PLA charged by that student's current institution, and it specifically calls out exams like CLEP and portfolios. And so there's some wiggle room there to use the funding to cover anything that might be associated with the use of credit for prior learning. So I really wanted to highlight the fact that credit for prior learning is a tool. And in 2020, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, or CALE, and the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, or WICHE, published a study called the PLA Boost. And it's a national study on the use and impact of credit for prior learning on adult student outcomes at 72 institutions across the country, both at 4-year and 2-year levels. This research was funded by the Lumina Foundation as well as Strata Education Network. And the report is considered a landmark study, and I encourage you to take a look at that. The link is also available at the end of this presentation. It's really a landmark study in the field. And a follow-up to that study that was recently done by CALE and WICHE, that was in 2021, was really doing a deeper dive into the data and looking at the credit for prior learning receipt rates by race, ethnicity, and income level. And that report is titled Equity Paradoxes in the PLA Boost. The key takeaways from the two reports are highlighted in this slide, and it's a good story for the most part, right? So if a student receives credit for prior learning, the study found that it boosts credential completion rates for adult learners by 17%. Credit for prior learning students were more likely to complete college credentials than non-CPL students. I'm going to use the phrase CPL, it's just easier to say. CPL also saves adult learners time and money. Again, this study was really looking at the average savings across, depending on the sector, anywhere from $1,500 to a little over $10,000. If they're earning 12 or more CPL credits, you're saving up to 9 to 14 months on time to degree. And then, of course, the institutions themselves benefit because they're retaining those students. That study found that credits who are earning credit for prior, students who are earning credit for prior learning took an additional 17.6 credits beyond what maybe those who did not receive credit for prior learning. So again, a nice boost, regardless of race, ethnicity, and income level. That was the finding of the landmark study. The follow-up study really emphasized the fact that credit for prior learning is an underutilized tool, and a focus on equity really needs to be central as we think about our credit for prior learning policies and practices. Again, while the boost is there for those who receive it, only about 1 in 10 adult students, or 11%, receive credit for prior learning. And those receipt rates were even lower for Black students and students from low income backgrounds, around 6 to 7%. And also to note here that fewer than 1 in 20 adults, around 2 to 4%, enrolled at two-year institutions received credit for prior learning. So fantastic outcomes, room for growth. This next slide, and these are maybe the text might be somewhat small, but it's just another way, it's a visual to demonstrate the powerful impact of credit for prior learning on credential completion. Of those who receive credit for prior learning, again, it shows a clear improvement in completion rates. And again, this information is available directly from the study and in the PowerPoint that's available on our website. So because CPL is a powerful tool, it has successful student outcomes, you know, why aren't we doing more of this, right? Back in the fall of 2020, the Commission worked with a number of organizations, including CALE, to pull together a statewide task force, which also carried out a survey of Indiana public post-secondary institutions to really dig into why is it that we're not utilizing this powerful tool. And out of that study, out of the task force findings and the survey, several key points are listed here on the slide, and that is, one, students and staff and others may not even be aware of what is credit for prior learning, that the fact that there is something out there for them to explore. And related, even if they are aware of the opportunity for credit for prior learning, it was sometimes difficult for them to find out about that information. Who do they go to? Where in the website is it that they can find the information? Do they have to dig, you know, under click after click after click? But you have to know about that first to even ask the question, right? Another challenge is oftentimes there's a lack of personnel to help administer credit for prior learning. Again, it speaks to this idea of intentionality. If this is such a valuable tool, an important tool, it's an underutilized tool, we need to boost our resources around it. And that was a challenge that was highlighted by this task force and survey. Another area is the fact that there may not be as many credit for prior learning opportunities depending on the field of study. And certainly it doesn't negate the fact that there may be areas where it's difficult to find a crosswalk for experiences, but it also points to the fact that maybe some more work needs to be done to identify at least some level of opportunity regardless of major. And so this is where, you know, professional development and time and the talent of faculty really need to come in play. Another challenge is the fact that there is a need for consistent institution-wide policies and practices. Not only within a given institution might you have one department over another, you know, really promoting the use of credit for prior learning, and therefore, depending on your major, depending on your experience, depending on your contacts, you may or may not have a positive interaction with credit for prior learning. So not only within that internal institution, but even statewide, we did see through the survey and the task force work a variety of policies and practices towards credit for prior learning. And then, you know, bottom line is, with all of that, there is that need for increasing the number of students using credit for prior learning to further their credential, shorten their time to degree, because again, we know it's a powerful tool. So on this slide, out of that work and out of the recommendations from the task force, as well as national research, I've highlighted here some of those best practices, but certainly there are several more. And we have public and private institutions here in Indiana who are doing just incredible things. And so I will make note that we would like to, as part of future work, hold up those models and share those practices as we move forward. But just again, to walk through what we have here, really just focusing on promoting awareness among staff, among students, among community partners, employers, around the availability and the policies and the methods related to credit for prior learning. We talk about affordability. Oftentimes this is one of those inconsistencies we see, is that you might have a charge for a type of credit for prior learning that's fairly nominal at one institution, and then it's much more expensive at another. But a best practice is that if the institution charges a fee, that it is based on the type of assessment, the type of credit for prior learning. It's not a blanket, and ensure that they are clearly published and available to students. And again, thinking about, we do have that financial aid flexibility to apply financial aid to any sort of fees charged by the institution for that student. Another area of best practice is that we should only count credit for prior learning credits toward that student's credential or program of study. And the reason for that is there are financial aid implications. There's a limit to the number of credits an individual can take before they run out of any eligibility for financial aid. And so you want to make sure that anything on that transcript is counting towards their program of study, and that on the transcript, those details of the assessment and sort of the background on that is clearly available. And that becomes important because as we think about another best practice, that is the transfer of credit for prior learning, is to encourage really institutions to accept that credit for prior learning awarded by another institution as they would any other type of credit. And oftentimes, in order to do so, they need to understand what goes into that. And so all the more reason to have the detailed record on that student's transcript. And then lastly, again, best practices, we need better data around credit for prior learning, and to ensure that our data systems are really linking that receipt of credit to the student's record, the student's demographics and outcomes, and that you're using that data to evaluate for access and effectiveness. Again, some incredible findings from the Kale and Witchy reports, and those can help guide some of the policies and the decisions at an institution level. Here are just some of those best practices. Also wanted to highlight, again, that it's not just the institutions, the post-secondary institutions, that have an opportunity to promote credit for prior learning. Here, I'd like to highlight a quote from the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. They say, employers are well positioned as effective messengers for encouraging Hoosiers to upskill, reskill, and increase education attainment. And in their most recent employer survey, which was carried out here in the fall, they had 922 employers respond. That survey suggests that there are many opportunities for institutions to award credit for prior learning based on employer-provided training or credentials. And here on the slide, highlighting the fact that 38% of those employers surveyed provide training that lead to an industry recognized certification. Another 20% said, well, they provide training that leads to their own credential that could be evaluated. And then another 47% said that there is just this other bucket of training out there that might be an opportunity for institutions to consider. We think about on-the-job training. How might you crosswalk those competencies, those outcomes into a credential? All right, so what are those next steps? Well, in my role, again, 3 months in, really thinking about what is that framework for action for adult strategy. Well, really, my focus is to expand that opportunity for adult learners through credit for prior learning as a core component of strategy moving forward. Highlighted here on the slide is the fact that under this credit for prior learning focus, we're going to be kicking off in February of 2023 a Veterans Education Pathway Task Force. Really, this is a cross-sector task force. We're pulling in not only post-secondary, but also government agencies, nonprofits, employers, individuals, really to focus in on identifying very specific opportunities and action steps to increase the use of military training, for example, through the Joint Services Transcript, by Indiana's colleges and universities to award credit for prior learning. Another area for another strategy of this task force is to really improve awareness and understanding of the numerous funding and student support services that are available to veterans. And then really just to ensure a more seamless experience for those individuals. As we think about that learner journey, right? All the way from that interest in recruitment, all the way through completion and into that next step. How can this task force help address some of the disconnects that may exist across agencies, across organizations, even internally, through the development of policy guidelines and toolkits? So that Veterans Task Force, too, is going to feed into this idea that we're exploring, and that is to really take that idea of a clearinghouse to the next level and to develop something like a credit for prior learning library. We have something similar in regular transfer credit at the state level. We have the core transfer library. So I think there's a lot of parallel there, a lot of opportunity to find consistency and transparency at the state level. And then related to that is, again, really digging in and developing some more guidelines and toolkits that could be used by a number of stakeholders. Part and parcel of that is the data collection. We know we don't have the data that is most valuable. And so that will be on the horizon for us to explore. And again, partnering closely with the chamber and others as we think about how do we engage the employers in this conversation and the opportunities to take their employees to that next step through credential attainment. And I like to say that while I've been in higher ed for 20 years, I'm always learning, and I'd never consider myself, I don't know everything around credit for prior learning, and I love to talk about it. I love to be a champion, and I encourage you to do as well. And here are some resources that I have found quite valuable in my career. And again, thinking about some national organizations that are really leading the charge on this, and you might be familiar with them or you may not be. But again, CALE and ACE. And here's also a link to our site, our Transfer In website that houses the clearinghouse as it is today. And with that, I think I'll pause and open it up to questions.
Dr. Townsley, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to point out that we had a wonderful comment by one of our participants that said they had attended a CALE workshop last month and that there was very good information on the very topic that you're discussing today.
Excellent. Yes, I look to them hands down. They are a wonderful resource. And you don't even have to be a member of CALE to benefit from the resources. But certainly if you are a member, if your institution's a member, you have even more access. I would like to see, the commission has partnered with CALE in the past, and on a number of fronts, and I think we'll be doing more so in the future.
Dr. Townsley, will you please put the last slide back up?
Oh, yes, hold on.
Yes.
And again, this will be available it is available on the website. Yep.
Yes, it is available on the website. If there are any questions, participants, please put them in the chat. And I've already sent out the link to the commission's website where you can find this presentation and any presentations from this wonderful conference, links. And there will also eventually be transcripts from the different chats. So you're able to look at everything that occurred today. Okay, the last slide is up. Are there any questions at this point? Dr. Townsley, I don't see any questions. Do you want to continue?
I think we can.
Wait. I think I might.
Can you post the link again?
Yes. Oh, yes, I sure will. I'll take care of that now. Thank you.
And then I'll also post in here my email address if ever you want to chat. I would love to hear from you. Of course, it's in all caps. I'm not sure why. So now you know more than you probably knew, hopefully. But again, we are all in this together. I think it's credit for prior learning has been around for a while, but it's really coming to the forefront. I think this is the time that we can all learn from each other and figure out how can we overcome some of those key barriers.
I see another question. Are there any thoughts or plans on how PLAs can connect to learning employment records?
Yes, Todd, that's a good question. So I think as we think about this building out a credit for prior learning library, part of that work is going to be closely tied to finding those underlying competencies that can be shared, that, standardized. And then we think about, how does that feed into this other initiative around Credential Engine, which then is also tied to the Learning Employment Record initiative that the state is piloting. And I know the chamber is doing a lot of work as well. So we think about how does this all fit together and how are we consistent in the language that we're using. And as we talk about things like work-based learning, and which is also can be crosswalked into credit for prior learning or PLA. That was a little bit of a rambling response, but yes, it is on the radar.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? Remember, if you do have questions, you can always, they can send them to you. Is that what we're doing?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Feel free to do that.
Yes, and did you give your contact information?
I did, and it's also at the very end of the presentation slides.
Okay. Oh, nice. Someone said thank you for sharing. Great, thanks. I love it when people give affirmations.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today, and I hope you can join us for the end of the convening session with our great panel with leaders from various sectors.